It's the late morning on the day after Christmas in the year 1900. A steamship named Hesperus has just set sail from a village on the northern coast of Scotland. Though the air is frigid and the waters are as dark as they are turbulent, the conditions are finally good enough to embark on this routine voyage. On board the Hesperus is a small relief crew consisting of the captain, a few shipmates, a few buoy masters, and finally, third assistant keeper Joseph Moore, who is the only one who won't be returning on board the Hesperus after they arrive at their destination. Their destination, to be exact, lies over 17 nautical miles away, in the middle of the North Atlantic Ocean. Stranded in the middle of the open waters, a small cluster of 7 rocky islands forms what are known as the Flannan Isles. Their name comes from the Irish Saint Flannan, who is said to have ventured here back in the 7th century in the hopes of finding an isolated refuge from the rest of the world. To some of the locals, however, these jagged, barren cliffs are more ominously referred to as the Seven Hunters, in homage to the countless travelers who were either shipwrecked by the unpredictable weather, or, as some would suggest, taken away by the spirits who haunt the islands and patiently await their next victims. Because of this menacing reputation, virtually no one else apart from St. Flannan has ever dared to call this place home, with only one notable exception being a group of lighthouse keepers who currently live on Eilean Moor, the largest of the 7 Flannan Islands. Here, the keepers are assigned to the recently commissioned Flannan Isles Station, which is by most standards a pretty typical lighthouse in everything except for its unusual location. After all, the only way for outsiders to get onto the island is by scaling its 150-foot cliffs without being swept off by any waves or sudden gusts of wind. On the bright side, by strategically placing the lighthouse at the highest peak on Eilean Moor, it can be seen from up to 24 miles away in clear weather, thereby providing a safe passage for any vessels arriving west from the Atlantic and continuing east through what is known as the Pentland Firth. As for the keepers, their job is to always make sure that they accomplish one simple goal, and that is to tend the light. Of course, as straightforward as this may sound, the job itself is by no means an easy profession. Apart from keeping the lamp in good working order, lighthouse keepers must also battle against the forces of nature, as well as the crushing weight of extreme isolation, making this arguably one of the toughest jobs that anyone could sign up for in the early 1900s. For these reasons, the station's superintendent, Robert Muirhead, has already made sure that he has entrusted this delicate task to 5 of his best individuals. The principal keeper, 43-year-old James Ducat, is by far the most seasoned of the roster, with over 20 years of experience under his belt. Thomas Marshall, the 30-year-old second assistant, has already garnered over 3 years of lighthouse keeping experience himself. Donald MacArthur, the occasional keeper, is temporarily filling in for first assistant William Ross, who had been away on sick leave for the past few weeks. Despite only being an occasional, MacArthur's practical knowledge proved invaluable in the island's unpredictable conditions. Finally, there's Joseph Moore, who is currently rotating in as the relief keeper to allow one of his colleagues a much-needed break from the island. As the station's third assistant, Moore knows that thanks to the unwavering diligence and overall trustworthiness of his fellow co-workers, the lighthouse will have definitely been in good shape by the time he arrives. However, there's just one problem. As the Hesperus slowly approaches the Flannan Isles, Moore begins to notice that something is off about the lighthouse. Usually, when the relief party comes within view of the station, the keepers will send back a signal flag acknowledging the ship's arrival. This time, however, no one is raising any flags. Sensing that something isn't right, the captain sounds the ship's horn a few times and orders a flare to be launched up into the pale sky. Again, no response is made. Now, with a growing sense of dread, the captain anchors the Hesperus as close to Eilean Moor as the waters will allow, and Joseph Moore, accompanied by a small landing party, enters a rowboat and prepares to make his way onto the island. After reaching the east landing stage and struggling to climb out of the boat, Moore quickly regains his balance and carefully makes his way up the steep, winding path on the side of the cliff face. Upon reaching the top and looking around for any signs of life, Moore would find what can only be explained as unexplainable. The entrance gate to the lighthouse and the door to the kitchen are both closed but unlocked. Inside, Moore notices that the kitchen is strangely tidy, as if whoever was there last had just finished cleaning up after dinner. The clock on the wall, however, is no longer ticking, and the fireplace had clearly not been lit for at least several days. Continuing on to the adjoining bedrooms, Moore finds that all of the beds are made, and everything as a whole appears to be in order. Yet, there is still zero trace of the three keepers. In a panic, Moore darts outside and runs back down to inform the rest of the party to follow him up and check out the scene for themselves. But unfortunately, his first impressions would only turn out to be correct. All three keepers, James Ducat, Thomas Marshall, and Donald MacArthur, have mysteriously vanished off the face of the island. Back on the mainland, the mystery of the missing keepers instantly captured the public's imagination. Newspapers all over the world began to speculate a wide range of different theories. Had they been swept away by the gales of the North Atlantic? Suddenly fled due to some unknown peril? Abducted by a mysterious sea creature or some other supernatural entity? The lack of evidence only fueled the flames of speculation as time went on. However, there are a few first-hand accounts that remain to help piece together the mystery as it unfolded. According to Joseph Moore, once he relayed his discovery back to the Hesperus, he prepared to return to the island with 3 other volunteers to help keep the light running for the time being. Meanwhile, Captain Harvey would sail the Hesperus back to the nearest telegraph station, where he would notify the secretary of the Northern Lighthouse Board. While waiting for backup to arrive, the volunteer crew on Eileen Moore would quickly begin a thorough investigation of the island, scouring for any clues that could help explain the sudden disappearance of their colleagues. Fortunately, the island itself is not very large. At the base of the east and west cliffs, one would find 2 different landing stages built specifically so that a landing could be made no matter the prevailing winds. Each stage is connected by a steep, winding path that climbs over 200 feet up to the lighthouse at the top of the island. Around the lighthouse are nothing more than the small living quarters that house the keepers, and an even smaller blessing chapel made out of a pile of rocks. Meanwhile, further down the cliffs, 2 separate crane platforms were constructed about 100 feet above each of the 2 landing stages. However, this is where Joseph Moore would make a big discovery. While the east crane platform was in perfect condition, which is where they had originally landed, the west platform on the other side of the island told a completely different story. A wooden box containing landing ropes had been overturned and scattered. A stone far too heavy to carry had been dislodged. The iron railings along the footpath were all twisted and contorted. And finally, the life buoy that was normally attached to the railings was nowhere to be found. This is where the disappearances must have taken place. The only question now was, when exactly did everything happen? It was clear that the keepers must have disappeared sometime between Hesperus's arrival on December 26th and the day of the last relief ship's departure on December 7th. Initially, Moore figured that their disappearance was linked to a great storm that had ravaged the western coast of Scotland on the night of December 20th. However, once Moore got a hold of the station's logbooks, he soon realized that this couldn't be the right date. The last official entry in the logbook was made all the way back on December 13th. However, additional readings were unofficially taken from the station's barometer and thermometer up until the morning of December 15th. As it turns out, this would align with an eyewitness report that was logged by Captain Holman of the American cargo ship SS Arctur. While making the journey from Philadelphia to Edinburgh, Holman's ship was the first to notice and make note of the fact that the lighthouse lamp was unlit on the night of December 15th. Additionally, Holman made the interesting remark that the weather was clear but stormy. To narrow things down even further, lighthouse regulations stipulate that one man must remain on duty at all times during the night, indicating that the disaster likely occurred during daylight hours when all three men could leave the lighthouse without violating protocol. Given the high latitude of the Flannan Isles and the late time of year, sunset would have been around 4 p.m. So based on all of these findings, it was determined that the disappearances had to have occurred sometime between 9 a.m. and 4 p.m. on Saturday, December 15th, 11 days before the relief ship's arrival. While the investigations had now succeeded in narrowing down the time of disappearance to almost the exact hour, they were still missing one major piece to the puzzle. How did the three keepers actually disappear? Among all the different theories, the most widely accepted is that they were either blown off of the island by a strong gust of wind or swept away by the ocean while trying to secure the heavily exposed west crane platform. Of course, even these explanations still leave out many unanswered questions. For example, how could all three keepers have left the lighthouse together, especially when one of their jackets was found hanging in the kitchen, something that should have been worn outside during a storm? Plus, if there was a storm, why would any of them go outside to begin with? Seasoned lighthouse keepers, well aware that their main responsibility is to keep the lamps lit, rarely venture outside during severe weather, and certainly never all at once. Lastly, if we are to assume that a freak wave had swept all of them off the crane platform, how is it that a wave could have even reached over 100 feet tall in the first place? For years, all of these questions only continued to steep the Flannan Isles in mystery, as everyone accepted that there would never be an exact explanation. Of course, not everyone was satisfied with this ending. So, over 50 years later, seasoned lighthouse keeper Walter Aldebert finally offered a compelling theory. Having served as the principal keeper on Eileen Moore from 1953 to 1957, Aldebert had plenty of time to grow accustomed to the same conditions his predecessors had faced back in 1900, and on several occasions, he nearly lost his own life while trying to test out his hypothesis. According to his theory, this is how the events must have unfolded. A storm is raging, and Mr. Ducat is worried about his landing ropes. Nobody goes out of a lighthouse in bad weather, but if he loses his ropes, relief may be impossible, and he must save them if he can. After dinner, the wind starts to drop. Leaving the cook to wash up, he and the other man put on their sea boots and coats and make their way to the west side, as there is no handrail by the railway. They come to the safety path, which has a handrail, reaching the path which runs at right angles to the stairway, and seeing the path dry, they continue towards the crane, where the box for stowing the landing ropes is situated. Suddenly, a wave much bigger than the previous ones comes in and sweeps one of the men back into the sea. The survivor, there is no means of saying which one, then made his way as quickly as possible up the 45-degree track to the shoulder and along to the top of the lighthouse, shouting through the doorway that his mate has disappeared. The cook, who has just sat down after clearing the dinner, knocks his chair from under him and rushes out without his coat. Grabbing a heaving line, the two men make their way back to the west side, hoping to throw the line to their unfortunate comrade. Then comes another huge wave, sweeping both men into the sea. To support his theory, Aldebert meticulously documented the waves that battered the island during heavy storms, using over 30 spools of film in total, though much of his work was ultimately lost due to water damage. Nevertheless, Aldebert would confirm that freak waves over 100 feet tall were not only possible, but sometimes even frequent in the surrounding waters. Even the lamp house, 330 feet up, can be splashed with spray in a storm, according to his experience. All in all, it seems that Aldebert's account has proven to be one of the most plausible explanations for what happened to the three lighthouse keepers, especially given how unpredictable and unforgiving the weather can be on the Flannan Islands. Yet, truth be told, no amount of investigation will ever fully reveal what exactly happened to James Duquette, Thomas Marshall, and Donald MacArthur on that fateful December afternoon.